Hey everyone, welcome to the Leshy Permaculture channel. My name is Frank. I want to talk about what is permaculture today. That's a common question I get when people see Leshy Permaculture, what's that? To a lot of people, I think it's kind of, they have a vague idea of hugel mounds or hugelculture and, maybe companion planting or letting weeds go a little bit more than normal. So I just want to start off a little series here on what is permaculture with the origins of permaculture. So permaculture was founded by two men, Bill Mollison and Dave Holmgren. The older of the two is Dave Mollison. He was born in Tasmania, Australia in 1928. And part of how he got his start and kind of started analyzing natural systems is through a series of outdoor jobs, which you can see there I've got listed. Shark fisherman, kind of exotic, forester, trapper, operating a tractor. Eventually, he joined the Wildlife Survey section of the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organization. That's when he was 26 years old. That's an organization in Australia, a government organization that handles things like agriculture. There's a lot of infrastructure stuff. I didn't look that much into that aspect. Doesn't really have a lot to do with this. But they do maintain a lot of museums that have flora and fauna from Australia, which is another one of the jobs that Mr. Mollison had. He was the curator of the Tasmania Museum in 1960. Obviously, at that point, he had kind of, you can see a clear propensity for nature, which eventually led him into pursuing a degree in biogeography in 1966. And that was at the University of Tasmania, where he would later go on to teach in the environmental psychology unit. In 1959, while observing marsupials in Tasmania, obviously there's a lot of marsupials out in Australia and the rainforest, he wrote, "I believe we could build ecosystems that would function as well as this one does." And this is kind of the seed of permaculture being planted, where at least where Mollison kind of credits the beginnings for the idea of permaculture really starting. So working, throughout all of these different jobs and then eventually being a professor doing research, Mollison began problem solving how to make a more sustainable agricultural system. It would have higher biodiversity. It would not rely on non-renewable resources or outside inputs, much like most modern industrial agriculture today. And that wouldn't really have the kind of negative environmental impacts we see through a lot of agriculture, but also obviously forestry and that sort of thing. One of the big things he noticed early on, which is definitely still a problem today, is topsoil erosion, losing a lot of topsoil. Around this time is when he left the CSIRO. So in his own words, he withdrew from society for 2 years. So I just wanted to add this quote from him kind of about this time period. I'm just going to read it off for you. "I withdrew from society for 2 years. I did not want to oppose anything ever again and waste time. I wanted to come back only with something very positive, something that would allow us all to exist without the wholesale collapse of biological systems." And that quote's a great, I think, kind of gets you a bit more of an understanding of where Mollison's coming from and where he was going with permaculture. So the other guy that I mentioned, David Holmgren, born in Fremantle, Western Australia. He joined the Tasmanian College of Advanced Education in the Department of Environmental Design. And during his studies there, he met Bill Mollison while Mollison was doing a seminar in 1974. After that meeting, they researched together, worked together, and Holmgren even lived with Mollison for quite some time as they worked on this property and kind of began developing this idea of permaculture. And this is when Permaculture 1, the initial book, was begun. So why did we write this book? It was a part of Holmgren's thesis in his studies. And then Bill Mollison added a lot of his own input and did the editing. You can see here we've got a nice list of people. Should probably expand on those at a later time. But those are some of the people David Holmgren also lists as significant influences on his work, whether they're just from reading their works or personal contact. I believe most, if not all of those, are people who had passed by the time Permaculture 1 was written. And eventually, Permaculture 1 would kind of be wrapped up and expounded on a little bit and become the Permaculture Designer's Manual, which is kind of the big book, the one that everyone relies on for permaculture design courses. Some people would call it the Bible of permaculture. I don't like referring to books that way. I think it's kind of cliche and not really a good example, but yeah, there it is. So after developing Permaculture 1, David Holmgren started experimenting on different properties. I believe his first one was actually his mother's house or his parents' house, eventually getting his own property, developing that, and creating a company called Holmgren Design Services, where he's done a lot of really cool projects around the world. You've got a lot of that outlined on their website. In 2002, he published Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability, which is supposed to be sort of a supplement to the Permaculture Designs Manual. It outlines the permaculture principles that are really common today. Definitely will have a video. We'll cover that a little bit later. Kind of the ethical companion piece for the Permaculture Design Manual. Mollison himself would later go on to help found Permaculture Institute, which is still around today, and he started teaching what he called permaculture design courses. You can see these all around. I've taken one, not from Permaculture Institute, but there are many options out there. Unfortunately, Bill passed away in 2016 at the age of 88, and Mr. Holmgren is still with us. So that didn't really go that much into explaining what permaculture is, but here we are with the name. It's a portmanteau of permanent and agriculture. So one of the things you'll hear a lot when people are talking about permaculture, a lot of times the summary will be, well, it's perennial agriculture, perennial horticulture. And that's not that bad of an understanding for just kind of a passing idea, but obviously it's a lot more than that. So some of the some of the later talk about the word permaculture, I think they kind of started to notice, hey, a permanent culture is kind of what we're building, also more than just agriculture. I think that's kind of an interesting way of seeing things. Obviously, agriculture kind of is one of the foundations of a culture. It's hard to have a culture, you're as a hunter-gatherer versus in place. I don't know that they really meant that. I just think that's kind of an interesting, a little bit of interesting anthropology. Anyways, I got a great quote here from Mollison. This is one of his attempts at really taking a stab at a succinct definition. Permaculture is the conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems which have the diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. It is the harmonious integration of landscape and people providing their food, energy, shelter, and other material and non-material needs in a sustainable way. Without permanent agriculture, there is no possibility for a stable order. So there you can kind of see a little bit of what I was getting at with the permanent culture rambling at the end there. Another one here. I promise I won't have too many big blocks of text. Permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, and of looking at plants and animals in all their functions rather than treating an area as a single product system. I think the key takeaways, at least for me, from this is the cooperative element and the observation of a system. So replicating nature, seeing what works, and then kind of coming away from that single product system. So if we have what we would call like a guild that has a fruit tree in the middle, we've got plants around the outside of the drip line of the tree, maybe raspberries or other bearing plants that will kind of live on a forest edge, and build out from there to have the pollinators all around in a ring. We've got roots that are going to bring the water down to the deeper tree roots. They're going to catch the water that comes off the sides of the tree, and we're going to be getting, fruits from the tree, from the berries around the tree. Pollinators will obviously have the benefits of being pollinators, attracting beneficial insects, attracting predatory insects that kill pests. Maybe we have medicinal qualities for some of those flowers, or just teas. And who wouldn't want to look at that, right? A lot nicer than your classic Midwestern tree with hostas under it. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but obviously we could optimize in a permaculture fashion. One of the other big aspects at the beginning of permaculture, I think one of the good introductory things, is the initial ethics, which are care for the earth, care for people, and setting limits to population and consumption. Now that's the way it's worded, I believe, in Permaculture 1, and kind of got reworded to return of surplus to the other two. Some people just call it return of surplus. Obviously this setting limits to population consumption sounds a little weird, not clear, kind of alarming. Usually I would just refer to that as return of surplus. Care for the earth. Obviously pretty self-explanatory. I think this is the one that people kind of already assume from the get-go. Appreciation and stewardship of soil, atmosphere, living things, biodiversity, water, habitats. Thinking of the long-term impact versus short-term gain. That's kind of one of the big differences from modern agriculture and permaculture, is the sustained long-term production instead of adding the inputs. So this ethic values conservation, ethical use of resources, avoiding waste, and working within the system, or I would say being a part of the system, which I think is that's a really good part of permaculture that I think gets missed in a lot of these sort of explanations, that when we're looking especially at modern agriculture, how you're outside of the system and not really a part of it. So, that's something kind of that I think once you understand it that way, it's hard not to see things that way. But when you haven't really thought of things that way, it's a weird change in mindset. And then, of course, the system should be beneficial and useful. So care for people. A system should provide food, water, and shelter, but also education, employment, or just something to do for people. I think contrary to how work works in a modern society, people do like working. They like doing something and having a purpose. Obviously, it's not the same as most people's jobs. And then opportunities for socializing, which I also think is an important part of, a human life. I would even add probably outlets for creativity as well would be important. That's not really in Permaculture Design Manual or Intro to Permaculture. That's the two books I've basically gotten all of this presentation's information from. Outside of obviously what I learned in my permaculture design class. So second here, providing for people's needs while also being an example of a successful system that includes earth care. So you can kind of see how I'm talking in the care for the earth aspect and being a part of the system. At a certain point, I think all of these ethics just kind of blend into one thing. which I guess is permaculture, right? That's sort of the point. So part of the providing for people's needs is also providing the sort of, I guess, philosophically greater need for an example of a successful system that isn't just removing topsoil or isn't relying on chemical inputs or creating large amounts of waste. And you can see how that really ties back into the care for the earth. You'll see all three of these ethics really do kind of just bleed together and I guess create permaculture at the end of the day, right? I think also worth noting is it includes teaching the techniques and applying traditional practices. So as part of the care for people, I think, is learning about practices of agriculture in different areas and, coming to understand different cultural practices. We've seen this kind of with biochar being a big thing now. Obviously, that's been something that's been done a lot by a lot of traditional agricultural practices, especially in the Amazon, have used biochar in a similar way, right? So some of the aspects of the care for people is sort of respect for what we already learned and maybe not having so much ego that we think, yeah, we've always improved and maybe there's, maybe there are things that are worth going back and looking at and trying to replicate again. So we back to the third, we're at the third of the ethics here, return of surplus. Now, like I said in the last one, all of these really do come back together. So we've got the usage of surplus being returned to the natural environment or to people outside the system. So what this really means is once you've gotten to the point where you've used everything you can, you should be sharing with other people. That's kind of an obvious one, right? Anyone who's grown zucchini is probably familiar with how easy it is to have too much zucchini and dumping it off on your neighbors and families and friends, right? But also returning it back into the environment, which is, I think, not always as apparent to people, which would be, usually would be something like making use of a waste stream. So when I harvest all my plants from my annual garden, I'm going to have a lot of essentially just biomass, right? All the plants that aren't vegetable that I can't dry and turn into something, and that's going to become compost. And a lot of times, if it's something like I've got walking stick kale, huge leaves, not super edible at the point where it's at to grow the large walking stick in the middle, those are going to be a great mulch over the winter, and they can kind of just break down right there, right? So there's a lot of things like that where you're maybe just have to think a little bit more about what's the waste. Really, or maybe a better way of saying it, right, is that you will create what feels like waste and you maybe just need to change your perspective on it. So yeah, obviously with like compost or literal animal waste, right, can be a great fertilizer, probably better than what you're going to get anywhere else. So again, sometimes that's just being creative, right? So a part of the sharing of the surplus, I think that can kind of get lost here, is the ways in which an effective system can be self-replicating. So obviously you can teach people the techniques, you can show them what it looks like, and they can try copy it. But also, you can propagate plants. You're going to have a ton of seeds. I love seed collecting. I've always got way too many seeds. Nothing makes me happier than when someone sends me a picture of their plants they grew with my seeds. It's great. So that's kind of the farther aspect, the kind of wider ranging surplus being returned almost back to the earth, right? Creating more of these sorts of systems. So summary here, wrap it all up together. So there's 3 ethics of care for the earth, care for people, and sharing of surplus. The use of design that utilizes or mimics natural systems and that values biodiversity, focus on resource efficiency over industrial agriculture and multiple yields instead of monoculture. I think there's a lot more to be said. I think this is kind of just sort of my initial summary here, and maybe by the end of all of these in the series, I'll be able to give you a more concise, give you my own definition in a simple sentence. So hang around, We'll definitely go over all the principles, and I hope you learned something. If you're confused, hopefully I didn't confuse you more. But thanks for watching, and have a good one.